When a desperate cowboy named Zeke Murphy accepted a free house in 1869 Nebraska Territory, he thought his luck had finally changed, until he discovered the ethereal woman who'd been waiting 7 years for someone brave enough to stay. As Cornelius Blackwood's armed men surrounded the property with deadly intentions, Zeke realized that some battles aren't fought with bullets, but with the kind of love that refuses to surrender even to death itself. But when Elena's ghostly powers begin to fade during their final stand, will Zeke lose the only person who ever made him feel like he belonged somewhere? Or will love prove stronger than the grave? The bottle shattered against the saloon wall, sending whiskey and glass flying in every direction. Ezekiel Murphy ducked just in time, feeling the sharp pieces whistle past his ear like angry hornets. The big man with the black beard wasn't done yet. He grabbed a chair and swung it hard at Zeke's head. "You cheated me!" the bearded man roared, spit flying from his mouth. "Nobody gets 3 kings twice in one night." Zeke rolled under a table, his heart pounding like a war drum. The Nebraska Territory, in August of 1869, was hot enough to fry eggs on rocks. But the Silver Dollar Saloon felt even hotter, with 20 angry cowboys ready to tear him apart. He hadn't cheated. He was just lucky for once in his sorry life. But try telling that to a drunk rancher who'd lost his month's pay. The table flipped over his head, and Zeke scrambled toward the back door like a rat fleeing a sinking ship. His boots slipped on the sawdust floor, wet with spilled drinks and maybe some blood from the last fight. Behind him, chairs crashed, and men shouted nasty words that would make a preacher faint. "Get him!" someone yelled. "Don't let that snake get away!" Zeke burst through the back door into the blazing afternoon sun. Devil's Ridge stretched out before him, a dusty little town that looked like God had sneezed and scattered buildings across the prairie. His horse was tied up front, but getting there meant running past the whole angry crowd. Not happening. He ran toward the edge of town instead, his lungs burning and his side aching from where someone had kicked him. Sweat poured down his face, mixing dirt and fear into muddy streaks. 3 months of bad luck had led him here. First, the cattle drive that ended when half the herd got sick, then the ranch job that disappeared when the owner's son came home from back east, and now this mess. The angry voices faded behind him as he climbed a small hill covered in scrub brush and rocks. At the top, he stopped to catch his breath and look back. The cowboys were already heading back into the saloon, probably to drink more and forget about the stranger who'd won their money fair and square. Zeke's stomach growled like a hungry bear. He reached into his pocket and counted his coins, enough for maybe 2 meals if he was careful. His other pocket held a bent photograph of his little sister Mary, the only family he had left since the fever took his parents 5 years back. She lived with their aunt in Missouri now, probably wondering why her big brother never wrote letters anymore. The truth was, he had nothing good to tell her. A hot wind blew across the prairie, carrying the smell of dust and dying grass. Summer was almost over, but the heat still hit you like walking into an oven. In the distance, he could see the train tracks that connected this nowhere place to somewhere places. But he didn't have money for a ticket, even if he knew where to go. That's when he saw it. Down by the edge of town, near a cluster of cottonwood trees that looked half dead, a wooden sign hung from a fence post. The paint was peeling like sunburned skin, but the words were clear enough: "Free house. Inquire at saloon." Zeke squinted hard. Sure, he was seeing things. Nobody gave away houses, especially not in a territory where land was worth more than gold. But there it was, plain as the nose on his face. He made his way down the hill, staying clear of the main street where people might recognize him from the fight. The sign was real, all right. Old wood with rusty nails holding it up, but real. Behind it, he could see a dirt path leading towards something white in the distance. His boots crunched on dry grass as he followed the path. After about 10 minutes of walking, he stopped dead in his tracks. A house sat in the middle of nowhere like a wedding cake someone had forgotten at a picnic. 2 stories tall with a wraparound porch, painted white though the color had faded to the shade of old bones. Windows sparkled in the afternoon sun, and he could see lace curtains hanging inside like spiderwebs made of fancy cloth. It was the prettiest house he'd ever seen, and that made him suspicious as a cat near water. No garden, no barn, no signs of life, except for a well with a wooden bucket hanging from a rope. The whole place felt empty, like a church on a weekday, but it also felt sad somehow, as if the house itself was lonely. Zeke walked closer, his boots echoing on the wooden porch steps. The front door was painted blue, the color of sky on a clear day, with a brass handle that needed polishing. He pressed his ear against the door but heard nothing except his own breathing. Why would anyone give away a place like this? The question stuck in his mind like a splinter as he walked back toward town. The Silver Dollar Saloon looked different now, less like a place that wanted to kill him and more like the only place that might have answers. The cowboys who'd been fighting him were probably too drunk to remember what he looked like anyway. He took a deep breath, pushed through the bat-wing doors, and stepped back into the lion's den. The saloon had emptied out some since the fight, leaving behind the smell of stale beer and broken dreams. Zeke kept his hat pulled low and his eyes on the floor as he made his way to the bar. The bartender was a mountain of a man with arms like tree trunks, wiping down glasses with a rag that had seen better days. "Whiskey," Zeke said, sliding a coin across the scratched wooden bar. "You got nerve coming back here," the bartender rumbled without looking up. His voice sounded like rocks rolling down a hill. "Lucky for you, Big Mike passed out in the back room, or you'd be eating dirt by now." The whiskey burned going down, but it helped steady Zeke's nerves. He glanced around the nearly empty room, noting the card tables with their green felt tops, stained by years of spilled drinks and bad decisions. In the far corner, one table remained occupied. A thin man in a black suit sat alone, dealing cards to invisible players with hands that moved like pale spiders. His hair was slicked back with so much oil it looked wet, and his mustache was waxed into sharp points. Everything about him screamed danger louder than a fire bell. "That sign outside town," Zeke said to the bartender, trying to sound casual. "The one about the free house." The big man's hands stopped moving for just a second. So quick most folks would have missed it. But Zeke had learned to watch for small signs during his years on the wrong side of luck. "You'd have to ask Mr. Blackwood about that," the bartender said, nodding toward the thin man in the corner. "He handles the business affairs around here." Before Zeke could chicken out, the man called across the room in a voice, smooth as honey, poured over broken glass. "Mr. Murphy, isn't it? Please, join me for a game." Zeke's blood turned cold. He hadn't told anyone his name, and he sure hadn't met this fancy stranger before. But walking away now would look suspicious, and suspicious men didn't live long in places like Devil's Ridge. He carried his whiskey over to the corner table, his boots creaking on the wooden floor. The man, Blackwood, apparently, gestured to the chair across from him with a smile that didn't reach his pale blue eyes. "Cornelius Blackwood, at your service." He shuffled the cards with professional skill. Word travels fast in small towns, especially about men who can hold their own in a fight. "Wasn't looking for trouble," Zeke said, settling into the chair. The wood was warm, as if someone had been sitting there all day, despite the empty room. "Of course not. Trouble has a way of finding certain people, doesn't it?" Blackwood dealt 5 cards to each of them with practiced ease. "I represent various business interests in this territory. Land development, mining claims, that sort of thing." Zeke picked up his cards. 2 pairs, kings and sevens. Not bad, but not great either. "The sign about the free house. That yours?" Blackwood's laugh sounded like wind through dead leaves. "In a manner of speaking, beautiful property really, built by a Mexican fellow about 8 years back. Miguel Vasquez, I think his name was. Poor man died in a mining accident before he could properly enjoy his new home. So why give it away?" "Well, that's the interesting part." Blackwood discarded 2 cards and drew 2 more. "The house seems to have developed something of a reputation. Previous residents have found it uninviting." Zeke matched the bet with another coin, though his money was running dangerously low. What kind of uninviting? Oh, the usual complaints. Strange noises at night, cold spots in the summer heat, doors that open by themselves. Blackwood's eyes glittered like chips of ice. Some folks are more sensitive to such things than others. You're talking about ghosts. I'm talking about opportunity. Blackwood laid down his cards, 3 eights. Not enough to beat Zeke's 2 pairs. The territory has laws about abandoned property. If someone can establish residence for 30 days, they can file a homestead claim. Legal ownership, completely free. Zeke gathered the coins from the center of the table, his mind racing. 30 days in a free house versus sleeping under bridges and begging for work. It wasn't much of a choice. What's the catch? He asked. The catch is that nobody has managed to stay longer than 3 nights. The record holder lasted exactly 72 hours before he came running back to town, babbling about voices in the walls. Blackwood dealt another hand. But you strike me as a man who's faced worse things than bumps in the night. That was true enough. Zeke had seen men die in the war, watched his parents waste away from fever, spent nights in jails that made graveyards look cheerful. How scary could one empty house be? 30 days. And it's mine legal? Completely legal. I have the paperwork right here. Blackwood pulled out a folded document from his jacket pocket. All you have to do is sign your name and survive whatever's waiting in that house. The paper felt strange under Zeke's fingers, too smooth, like touching water. The words were all there in fancy legal language, but something about the whole deal felt wrong. Too easy, too convenient. Why me? Zeke asked. You could offer this to anybody. Because, my friend, you have something most men lack. Blackwood's smile grew wider, showing teeth too white for a frontier town. You have absolutely nothing left to lose. The words hit like a punch to the gut because they were true. No family except Mary, who was better off without him. No friends who hadn't died or drifted away. No money, no prospects, no future worth protecting. Blackwood slid a brass key across the table. It was warm despite the cool air in the saloon, and heavier than it should have been for such a small thing. The choice is yours, Mr. Murphy. You can walk away right now and keep running from town to town, always 1 step ahead of trouble and 2 steps behind success. Or you can take that key, spend 30 nights in a perfectly good house, and wake up as a landowner with real prospects. Zeke's hand hovered over the key. Every instinct he'd developed in 32 years of hard living told him to walk away. But every dream he'd ever had about settling down, about having a place to call home, about being more than just another drifter with empty pockets, whispered that this might be his only chance. He closed his fingers around the key. 1 month, he said. And if I can stick it out, the house is mine, free and clear? Free and clear, Blackwood agreed. Though I'd be surprised if you last 3 days. As Zeke stood to leave, the thin man called after him. Oh, and Mr. Murphy? You might want to stop by the general store before you head out there. Stock up on supplies, lamp oil, that sort of thing. The house has been empty for quite some time. Walking toward the door, Zeke felt eyes on his back like spider webs brushing his skin. But when he turned around, Blackwood was already dealing cards to his invisible players again, humming a tune that sounded like a funeral march played backward. The brass key felt like it was burning a hole in his pocket as he stepped out into the fading daylight, wondering what exactly he'd just agreed to do. The old wooden house loomed before Zeke like a giant beast made of peeling paint and broken dreams. Every step up the creaky porch stairs made his heart pound faster, but not from fear, from hope. After 3 months of sleeping under stars and eating nothing but stale bread, this place looked like paradise. The key felt warm in his sweaty palm as he turned it in the rusty lock. The front door swung open with a long, sad groan that echoed across the empty prairie behind him. Cool air rushed out to meet him, carrying the sweet smell of dried flowers and something else he couldn't name. Dust particles danced in the golden sunlight that streamed through windows, covered with delicate white curtains. Everything inside sparkled with tiny specks of light, like fairy dust in the children's stories his mother used to tell. "Well, I'll be," Zeke whispered to himself, dropping his worn leather bag by the door. The inside of this house looked nothing like the rough shacks and dirty saloons he'd been sleeping in. Rich red carpet covered the floors, and fancy wooden furniture sat under white sheets like sleeping giants. A tall grandfather clock stood silent in the corner, its brass pendulum hanging still as death. He pulled the sheet off a beautiful velvet chair and plopped down with a grunt of relief. His bones ached from weeks of walking, and the soft cushions felt like sitting on a cloud. Through the window, he could see the town of Devil's Ridge in the distance, its buildings looking small as toy blocks from up here. The kitchen held wonders he hadn't seen in years. A big black stove that looked barely used, shelves lined with jars of preserved fruits and vegetables, a wooden table that could seat 6 people, though dust showed no one had eaten there in a long time. His stomach rumbled loudly, reminding him that he'd only eaten a handful of berries that morning. Upstairs, 3 bedrooms waited like secret treasure rooms. The first held a child's bed with carved animals on the headboard. The second looked like it belonged to guests, with 2 neat beds and a wash basin. But the third room, the biggest one, at the end of the hall, made him stop and stare. A 4-poster bed dominated the space, its dark wood gleaming even under a layer of dust. Lace curtains hung at tall windows that looked out over rolling hills. On the nightstand sat a small picture in a silver frame, a young woman with the kindest eyes he'd ever seen. Her smile seemed to reach right out of the photograph and touch his heart. Next to the picture lay a thick book bound in brown leather. Zeke picked it up carefully, running his rough fingers over the smooth cover. The pages felt soft as silk, covered with neat handwriting in black ink. He opened it to the first page and read, "The Diary of Elena Vasquez, wife of Miguel, mistress of this house." Something made him close the book quickly, as if he'd been caught reading someone else's mail. This woman's private thoughts weren't meant for his eyes. He set it back down gently and backed away from the bed, feeling like he was trespassing in a church. The sun was setting by the time he'd explored every room, painting the sky outside in shades of orange and pink. He'd found more luxuries than he'd dreamed possible: soft towels, real soap, even a bathtub big enough for a grown man. But something felt strange about it all. This house was too perfect, too untouched. It felt like walking through a museum, where everything was preserved exactly as someone had left it. He made himself comfortable in the parlor downstairs, unwilling to claim the bedrooms that clearly belonged to someone else. Using some wood from a neat stack by the fireplace, he built a small fire to chase away the evening chill. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, making the covered furniture look like crouching monsters. As darkness fell outside, the house grew quieter than any place he'd ever been. No sounds of other people talking or moving around. No horses clip-clopping down dusty streets. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath around this place. The silence pressed against his ears like cotton balls, broken only by the occasional pop from his fire and the distant call of a night bird. Zeke stretched out on the soft carpet, using his bag as a pillow. His body relaxed for the first time in months, sinking into the plush fabric like it was trying to swallow him whole. His eyelids grew heavy as the fire burned lower, casting the room in a warm red glow. He was just drifting off to sleep when he heard it, a sound that made his blood turn cold as ice water. Footsteps. Soft, bare feet walking across wooden floors somewhere above his head. The footsteps moved slowly from room to room, like someone searching for something they'd lost. Zeke's eyes snapped open, and he held his breath, listening. The footsteps stopped directly above him, right where the master bedroom would be. Then came another sound that made his heart nearly stop beating. Someone was crying. Soft, broken sobs that drifted down through the ceiling like rain through clouds. The sound was so full of sadness that it made his own eyes water, even though he didn't know why. He sat up slowly, every muscle in his body tense as a coiled snake. His hand moved to his hip where his gun used to be, before he'd sold it for food, money, 2 towns back. The fireplace poker would have to do. He grabbed it with shaking fingers and crept toward the staircase. "Hello?" he called out, his voice cracking like a boy's. "Someone up there?" The crying stopped instantly. The silence that followed was so complete it seemed to suck the air right out of his lung. He climbed the stairs one at a time, each step creaking under his weight, like it was announcing his arrival to whatever waited above. The upstairs hallway stretched before him, lit only by moonlight streaming through the windows. All 3 bedroom doors stood wide open, showing nothing but blackness beyond. The air up here felt different, colder, thicker, like breathing through wet wool. "I know you're here," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm not looking to cause trouble. Just needed a place to sleep for the night." From the master bedroom came a whisper so soft he almost missed it. "He's gone." Zeke's grip tightened on the poker until his knuckles turned white, but his feet kept moving toward that whispered voice, like they had a mind of their own. Everything his pa had taught him about surviving in dangerous territory screamed at him to run, to get out of this house and never look back. But something stronger than fear pulled him forward. The loneliness in that voice matched the emptiness in his own chest. "Who's gone?" he asked, his voice barely louder than a breath. "Who are you?" The answer came like wind through wheat fields, sad and soft. "They all leave. Every single one. They come here looking for shelter, and they hear me. And they run away, just like everyone else always does." Against every smart thought in his head, Zeke found himself stepping into the doorway of the master bedroom. What he saw there made him forget how to breathe. A woman sat on the edge of the big bed. But she wasn't like any woman he'd ever seen. She glowed with a pale light that seemed to come from inside her skin, and he could see right through her to the wooden headboard behind. She was the woman from the photograph, but younger somehow, with long dark hair that flowed down her back like water. Her white nightgown moved in a breeze he couldn't feel, and when she looked up at him, her eyes held more sadness than any person should have to carry. "You can see me," she whispered, and wonder replaced the grief in her voice like sunrise chasing away the night. "Yeah," Zeke managed to croak out, the poker falling from his numb fingers to clatter on the wooden floor. "I can see you just fine." For a long moment, they stared at each other across the moonlit room. The woman, the ghost, because that's what she had, to be tilted her head like a curious bird. "You're not running," she said, sounding surprised. "Should I be?" A smile touched her lips, the first happy expression he'd seen on her face. "Most people do. They see me, and they think I'm going to hurt them somehow. But I've never hurt anyone in my life. I wouldn't know how." Zeke took a careful step into the room, then another. The ghost didn't move or threaten him, just watched with those impossibly sad eyes. "What's your name?" "Elena. Elena Vasquez. This is my house. My husband Miguel built it with his own hands, board by board, nail by nail. He wanted to make something beautiful for us, to grow old in together." Her voice caught like fabric on a thorn. "We were going to fill these rooms with children and laughter, and all the good things that make a house a home. What happened to him?" Elena's form flickered like a candle in wind, becoming more transparent before solidifying again. "Cave in at the silver mine up in the hills. 12 men went down that day, including my Miguel. I waited for news, paced these floors for 3 days straight, praying to every saint I could remember, when they finally brought his body home." She didn't finish the sentence, but Zeke understood. He'd seen enough death in the war to know how it could break a person's heart clean in two. "That's when grief is a terrible thing, Mr. Murphy. Ezekiel Murphy, but most folks call me Zeke. Grief is a terrible thing, Zeke. It starts as a small crack in your heart, but if you're not careful, it spreads and spreads until there's nothing left of you but the hurting." Elena stood up from the bed, and he noticed she cast no shadow despite the moonlight streaming through the windows. "I couldn't bear the thought of leaving this place Miguel built with so much love. So I stayed, even after my body couldn't anymore. The ghost Elena moved to the window and gazed out at the star-filled sky. That was 7 years, 3 months, and 16 days ago. Not that I'm counting, you understand. Zeke felt a laugh bubble up in his chest, surprising them both. 7 years is a long time to be alone. It is. She turned back to him, and he saw something in her expression that made his heart squeeze tight. Recognition. Like looking in a mirror and seeing someone who understood exactly what it felt like to have the world leave you behind. You know something about being alone, don't you, Zeke Murphy? He did. The war had taken his brother and his best friend. The woman he'd planned to marry had decided she couldn't wait for a man who might never come home whole. Every job he'd tried since had ended with him moving on, either by choice or by force, leaving nothing but dust and regret behind him. I know a little about it, he admitted. Elena moved closer, her bare feet making no sound on the wooden floor. People have come to this house before, drifters and cowboys and men looking for a fresh start, just like you. But when they see me, when they realize they're sharing space with someone who's already dead, they get scared and run off into the night. Why don't you hide from them? Make yourself invisible, or whatever it is ghosts do? Her laugh was like silver bells ringing. Because I'm lonely, Zeke. I've been alone in this house for so long that I'd rather have someone run away screaming than have no one at all. At least when they scream, I know I'm real. I know I still exist. Something inside Zeke's chest cracked open like an egg, spilling warmth through his whole body. This beautiful, sad woman, ghost or not, understood him in a way no living person ever had. They were both lost souls, both carrying wounds that hadn't healed right, both looking for a place where they could rest without fear of being hurt again. Well, he said, settling down on the floor with his back against the wall, I'm not running anywhere. Been walking for 3 months straight, and my feet are tired of it. Elena's eyes widened. You mean you'll stay? Even knowing what I am? Lady, I've slept next to rattlesnakes and outlaws, and men who hadn't bathed since Christmas. A polite ghost who smells like flowers doesn't scare me one bit. For the first time since he'd seen her, Elena's smile reached all the way to her eyes. She sat down on the bed across from him, pulling her knees up to her chest like a little girl. Tell me about yourself, Zeke Murphy. What brings a living man to Devil's Ridge, and why are you willing to share a haunted house with a dead woman? So he told her about the war and the friends he'd lost, about the cattle drives that went wrong and the bosses who didn't trust him, about walking from town to town looking for work, for a place to belong, for anything that might make him feel less like a stranger in his own life. The words poured out of him like water from a broken dam, and Elena listened to every one without judgment or advice, just pure understanding. When he finished, the first hints of dawn were painting the eastern sky pink and gold. Elena had grown more solid during their conversation, less translucent, as if sharing stories had made her more real somehow. The sun's coming up, she said softly. That it is. In daylight, I'm harder to see. Sometimes I disappear altogether until darkness falls again. Zeke nodded. I'll be here when you get back. Elena's smile could have lit up the whole territory. Promise? Promise. As the sun climbed higher, Elena's form began to fade like morning mist, but her voice remained clear and strong. Thank you, Zeke Murphy, for not running away. Then she was gone, and he was alone in a house that somehow didn't feel empty anymore. The morning sun painted Devil's Ridge in shades of gold when Elena appeared beside Zeke's coffee cup, her ghostly form shimmering like heat waves off summer stone. But this morning was different. She looked solid enough to touch, and the scent of jasmine filled the air wherever she moved. You're getting stronger, Zeke said, reaching out slowly. His fingers passed through her arm, but he could swear he felt warmth. Elena's eyes sparkled with something between hope and mischief. Maybe I'm not the only one changing around here, Cowboy. She glided toward the kitchen window, her bare feet making no sound on the wooden floors. Outside, The prairie stretched endlessly under a sky so blue it hurt to look at directly. But Elena wasn't watching the horizon, her attention fixed on something moving in the distance. "Riders coming," she whispered, her voice carrying an edge Zeke hadn't heard before. 3 men on horseback approached the house at a steady pace, their movements purposeful rather than casual. The lead rider wore a badge that caught the morning light, and even from this distance, Zeke could see the serious set of his shoulders. "Lawmen," Zeke muttered, setting down his coffee with hands that suddenly felt unsteady. Elena turned from the window, her face pale with worry. "Sheriff Morrison. He's been to town, asking questions about this place. About you." "What kind of questions?" "The kind that usually end with someone wearing handcuffs." Zeke's mind raced through possibilities. Had someone recognized him from Kansas? Did they know about the saloon fight in Texas? Or worse, had Blackwood convinced the law that Zeke was trespassing on property that didn't belong to him? The horses stopped at the front gate, and Sheriff Morrison dismounted with the careful movements of a man who'd seen too much trouble in his lifetime. His 2 deputies followed suit, their hands resting easy on their gun belts, but ready to move fast if needed. "Ezekiel Murphy," Morrison's voice carried across the yard like thunder. "Need to have a word with you." Elena placed her ghostly hand on Zeke's shoulder, and somehow he felt its weight. "Whatever happens, don't let them take you away from here. This house needs you now." "What do you mean?" But Elena was already fading, becoming transparent as morning mist. "Trust me, mi corazón. And remember, some fights can't be won with bullets." Zeke straightened his shoulders and walked to the front door, his boots echoing on the hardwood floors. Through the screen, he could see Morrison approaching with measured steps, his face unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. "Sheriff," Zeke said, pushing open the door. "What brings you out this way?" Morrison stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, his gray eyes taking in every detail of Zeke's appearance. "Got some questions about your arrangement with Mr. Blackwood. Seems there's some confusion about who actually owns this property." "No confusion on my end. Man offered me a free house. I took it. Been here 3 days now, which gives me legal claim under territorial law." One of the deputies, a young man with nervous energy, shifted his weight from foot to foot. "Sheriff, maybe we should just—" "Quiet, Johnson." Morrison never took his eyes off Zeke. "Thing is, Murphy, Blackwood's claiming you threatened him. Says you pulled a gun on him in the saloon, forced him to hand over that key." The lie hit Zeke like a physical blow. "That's not what happened." "So, you deny pulling a weapon on Mr. Blackwood?" "I deny threatening anybody. Man practically begged me to take this place off his hands." Morrison's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "See, that's where things get interesting. Because Mr. Blackwood, he's what you might call a pillar of the community, owns half the businesses in town, pays his taxes regular, never been in any kind of trouble, and I'm just a drifter with no reputation to speak of." Zeke finished. "Your words, not mine." The second deputy cleared his throat. "Sheriff, the locals are saying strange things about this place. Maybe we should—" "I don't care what the locals are saying about ghosts and haunts," Morrison snapped. "I care about facts. And the fact is, we got a respected businessman claiming he was robbed and a stranger with no permanent address holding stolen property." Inside the house, something crashed to the floor, the sound of breaking glass echoing through the rooms. Morrison's hand moved instinctively toward his gun. "Just the wind," Zeke said quickly. "Old houses, you know how they settle." But even as he spoke, he could feel Elena's presence, like electricity in the air. She was angry, and when Elena got angry, the house itself seemed to respond. Morrison studied Zeke's face for a long moment. "Here's what's going to happen, Murphy. You're going to come back to town with us, peaceful-like, and we're going to sort this whole thing out proper. Judge arrives on Friday's stage, and he can decide who's telling the truth. And if I refuse, then we do this the hard way." The wind picked up suddenly, sending dust devils dancing across the yard and rattling the windows in their frames. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees in as many seconds, and Zeke saw Johnson shiver despite the morning heat. "Sheriff," Johnson whispered urgently, "something ain't right about this place. The boys in town, they say nobody can stay here more than a couple nights before." "Before what?" Morrison demanded. "Before the ghost lady makes them leave." Morrison's jaw tightened. "I don't believe in ghost stories, Deputy. I believe in law and order." But Zeke noticed that the sheriff's hand hadn't moved away from his gun, and his eyes kept darting toward the house, as if expecting something to emerge from its shadows. Elena materialized on the porch behind Zeke, visible only to him but somehow making her presence felt by everyone. The air grew colder still, and frost began forming on the porch railings despite the blazing sun. "Tell them," Elena whispered in Zeke's ear. "Tell them the truth about Blackwood." "What truth?" "He's been trying to force people out of their homes all over the territory. Claims they abandoned their properties, then files homestead papers. There's a family in Cedar Falls who lost their farm the same way." Morrison was watching Zeke's face closely. "You got something to say, Murphy?" Zeke took a deep breath. "Sheriff, before you arrest me for something I didn't do, maybe you should ask around about Blackwood's other business dealings. Ask the Hendersons in Cedar Falls how they lost their farm. Ask the widow Patterson about the mineral rights she signed over after her husband died mysterious-like." The effect was immediate. Morrison's expression shifted from skeptical authority to sharp interest. "How do you know about the Patterson case?" "Word gets around. Drifters hear things, especially about men who prey on folks with nowhere else to turn." Johnson and the other deputy exchanged glances. "Sheriff," Johnson said carefully, "my cousin works at the land office. Says Blackwood's been filing an awful lot of claims lately, properties that supposedly got abandoned." Morrison held up a hand for silence, his mind clearly working through possibilities he hadn't considered before. The frost on the porch railings grew thicker, and now their breath was visible in the suddenly frigid air. "This is getting mighty strange," the second deputy muttered. Elena stepped closer to Zeke, and he felt her ghostly fingers intertwine with his. To his amazement, they felt solid, warm, real. Around them, the supernatural cold began to fade, replaced by something that felt like protection. "Sheriff Morrison," Zeke said quietly, "I'm not running from anything, and I'm not looking for trouble, but I'm also not leaving this place without a fair hearing. If Blackwood wants to claim I stole something, let him prove it in front of a judge." Morrison studied the house with new eyes, taking in its well-maintained appearance. The flowers growing wild in the front garden, the sense of permanence that surrounded it like an invisible shield. "You know what, Murphy? Maybe you got a point. Maybe we all need to hear what the judge has to say about this situation." He turned to his deputies. "Johnson, I want you to ride over to Cedar Falls. Talk to those Henderson folks. Find out exactly how they lost their farm. And stop by the land office on your way back. I want to see all of Blackwood's recent filings." "Yes, sir." "What about him?" the second deputy asked, nodding toward Zeke. Morrison considered for a moment. "He stays put until Friday. But Murphy, if you so much as think about disappearing before the judge arrives, I'll hunt you down and drag you back in chains." "We clear?" "Crystal clear, Sheriff." As the lawmen mounted their horses and rode away, Elena became visible again, her form more solid than Zeke had ever seen it. She was smiling, but tears tracked down her ghostly cheeks. "You stood your ground," she said softly, "even when it would have been easier to run. Had good reason to stay." Elena's smile widened. "The judge will see through Blackwood's lies, but he won't stop there. Men like him never do." "What do you mean?" "He'll come for us before Friday, Zeke. He'll come with guns and fire and everything he can bring to bear. Because if the truth comes out in court, he'll lose more than just this house." Zeke pulled her close, amazed when she felt solid and warm in his arms. "Then we'll be ready for him. Together?" "Together." But even as they held each other in the morning sunlight, both knew that the easy part was over. The real battle was still coming. 2 days passed, like the calm before a prairie storm, with Zeke and Elena preparing for trouble that felt as inevitable as sunset. Elena had grown stronger with each passing hour, able to move objects with increasing ease and maintain her solid form for longer periods. But strength came with a price. She tired more easily, and sometimes Zeke caught her staring at nothing with eyes full of longing he didn't understand. "You're thinking about crossing over," he said on Thursday evening, as they sat on the porch swing, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. Elena's laugh held no humor. "Every ghost thinks about it, mi corazón. The pull is always there, like a river current trying to carry you downstream. What stops you? Fear, mostly. Fear that there's nothing on the other side. Or worse, that there's everything I lost, waiting to remind me of my failures." Before Zeke could respond, the sound of approaching horses shattered the peaceful evening. But these weren't the measured hoofbeats of lawmen. This was the thunder of many riders moving fast with violent purpose. Elena vanished instantly, her form dissolving like smoke, but her voice lingered in the air. "He's brought an army this time." Through the trees came 12 men on horseback, their faces hard as winter stone in the failing light. Blackwood rode at their head, a rifle across his saddle and murder in his eyes. Behind him came faces Zeke recognized, drifters and gunfighters, the kind of men who sold their loyalty to whoever paid best. "Time's up, Murphy." Blackwood's voice cut through the evening air like a blade. "Sheriff ain't here to protect you now, and the judge ain't coming till tomorrow. That gives us all night to settle our business." Zeke stepped to the edge of the porch, his hands steady despite the odds stacked against him. 12 against 1 seems about right for a man of your character, Blackwood. "Should have taken my generous offer when you had the chance." Blackwood's smile was cold as January wind. "Now we do this the permanent way." One of the hired guns, a scarred man with dead eyes, leaned forward in his saddle. "Boss, maybe we should just burn them out. Fire don't leave witnesses." "No." Blackwood's voice carried a strange intensity. "This house comes down board by board, and Murphy watches every second before he dies. I want him to understand what happens to people who cross Cornelius Blackwood." The temperature around the house dropped 20 degrees in as many seconds, and frost began forming on the windows, despite the warm evening. The horses shifted nervously, sensing something their riders couldn't see. Elena materialized beside Zeke, blazing with ghostly light that made the gunmen shield their eyes. But this time she wasn't trying to hide. She wanted them to see her, to understand exactly what they were facing. "Holy hell," one of the men whispered. "It's true. The place really is haunted." "Ghosts don't stop bullets," Blackwood snarled, but his voice carried less certainty than his words suggested. Elena stepped forward, and when she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who defended this ground for 7 long years. "This is my home. My husband built it with love, and I have protected it with everything I am. You are not welcome here." The scarred gunman raised his rifle, but before he could fire, every window in the house exploded outward simultaneously. Glass shards filled the air like deadly snow, and the horses reared and bucked in terror. 2 of the riders were thrown, hitting the ground hard enough to knock the fight out of them. "Spread out," Blackwood shouted over the chaos. "Surround the house. If we can't smoke them out, we'll starve them out." But Elena was just getting started. She raised her hands, and the wind rose with them. Not the gentle prairie breeze they'd felt before, but a howling gale that bent trees and sent dust and debris swirling through the air like a tornado. Lightning began flickering in the suddenly dark sky, though no storm clouds were visible. "She's controlling the weather," Johnson's cousin, one of the hired guns, pointed at Elena with a shaking finger. "This ain't natural." 3 more men broke and ran, spurring their horses toward town as fast as they could ride. But Blackwood and 6 others held their ground, spreading out to form a rough circle around the property. "I don't care if she's the devil himself," Blackwood screamed over the wind. "She's just a ghost, and ghosts can't hurt living men." To prove his point, he raised his rifle and fired at Elena. The bullet passed through her ghostly form without effect, but the effort of maintaining the supernatural storm was clearly taking its toll. She flickered like a candle in a strong breeze, and Zeke saw exhaustion in every line of her translucent face. "Elena, you're pushing too hard." "I can hold them off," she gasped. But even as she spoke, the wind began to die down. The remaining gunmen sensed weakness and pressed their attack. Rifles cracked in the growing darkness, bullets splintering wood and shattering what was left of the windows. Zeke dove for cover behind the porch railing, drawing his own weapon and returning fire as best he could. But 7 men with good positions and plenty of ammunition against one tired cowboy and a fading ghost. The math wasn't promising. Elena tried to manifest again, to bring back the protective storm, but this time she barely managed to become visible. The effort left her gasping like someone who'd run a long race, and Zeke realized with growing horror that she was burning herself out. "Stop!" he called to her. "You're killing yourself." "Already dead," she managed with a weak smile. "But you're not, and I won't let them take you." She gathered herself for one final effort, pouring everything she had left into a last desperate gambit. The house itself began to shake, boards creaking and groaning as if the building were coming alive. Pictures fell from walls, furniture slid across floors, and from somewhere deep in the foundation came a sound like the earth itself splitting open. The gunmen's horses went mad with terror, bucking and screaming as they fled into the night. Even Blackwood's mount reared and nearly threw him before he could regain control. "The whole place is coming apart," one of the remaining men shouted. "Boss, we need to get out of here." But Blackwood was beyond reason now, his face twisted with greed and rage, and something that might have been fear. "No, we finish this tonight. I've put too much into this to walk away empty-handed." He dismounted and advanced on foot, his rifle at the ready. The other men followed reluctantly, but they followed. As they closed in on the house, Elena's supernatural light began to fade. "I'm sorry," she whispered to Zeke. "I thought I was strong enough." "You are strong enough. Stronger than any of them." Elena looked at him with eyes full of love and desperate hope. "Then help me." "How?" "Trust me. And when I say run, you run. Don't look back. Don't hesitate. Just run." Before he could ask what she meant, Elena dissolved entirely. Not fading like before, but vanishing completely, as if she'd never existed at all. The sudden absence of her presence hit Zeke like a physical blow, leaving him alone on the porch with 7 armed men closing in from all sides. Blackwood's laugh was harsh as breaking glass. "Looks like your ghost friend abandoned you, Murphy. Can't say I'm surprised. They always do in the end." But even as the words left his mouth, something began happening to the house behind Zeke. Every lamp and candle inside blazed to life simultaneously, filling the windows with golden light that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. The temperature began to rise instead of fall, and the air itself seemed to thicken with anticipation. "Elena," Zeke whispered. Her voice came from everywhere and nowhere, surrounding him like warm honey. "I'm here, mi corazón. I'm in every board, every nail, every brick of this place, and I'm not letting them take it from us." The house erupted, not with fire or explosion, but with pure, ghostly energy that sent shockwaves rippling through the ground. The front door flew open with enough force to tear it from its hinges. Windows that had already been broken somehow shattered again, raining glass like hail, and from inside came a sound like 100 voices singing in harmony, beautiful and terrible and absolutely unstoppable. The hired guns broke and ran without shame, their nerve finally snapping under the assault of something far beyond their understanding. But Blackwood stood his ground, his rifle trained on Zeke with desperate determination. "I don't care what she is or what she can do," he screamed over the supernatural chorus. "You're still flesh and blood, Murphy, and flesh and blood dies easy." His finger tightened on the trigger, just as Elena's voice whispered in Zeke's ear, "Now, run!" Zeke dove sideways as the rifle cracked, feeling the bullet part the air where his head had been a split second before. He rolled behind the porch swing and came up running, vaulting the railing and sprinting toward the trees as Elena's ghostly light blazed behind him like a fallen star. Behind him, the house continued its supernatural convulsions, and Blackwood's curses followed him into the darkness. But for the first time since this whole thing began, Zeke was smiling because he finally understood what Elena had been trying to tell him all along. Some battles couldn't be won with bullets. Some battles required something much more powerful. They required love willing to sacrifice everything for the people it protected. And Elena had just shown Blackwood and his hired killers exactly what that kind of love could do. The crack of splintering wood echoed across the prairie as Blackwood's boot connected with the front door. Zeke pressed his back against the parlor wall, rifle clutched in sweaty palms, counting the heavy footsteps that thundered into his sanctuary. 4 men, maybe 5, each one paid to put him in the ground. "I smell your fear, Murphy." Blackwood's voice boomed through the house like thunder before a storm. "Come out now, and I'll make it quick. Hide like a coward, and we'll burn this place down around your ears." Elena materialized beside Zeke, her ghostly form flickering like candlelight in a windstorm. "They're spreading coal oil on the walls," she whispered, her voice tight with worry. "Planning to smoke you out. Can you stop them?" "I can try." But Elena's form wavered, becoming more see-through with each passing second. "Manifesting in daylight drains me. I'm not as strong as I was when we first met." The acrid smell of kerosene began seeping through the floorboards. Smoke curled under the parlor door like grasping fingers. Zeke's chest tightened as memories of the war crashed over him, buildings ablaze, friends trapped inside, the horrible sound of men screaming as flames consumed everything they'd fought to protect. "No." The word came out harder than he intended. "Nobody burns down your home. Not while I'm breathing." Elena's eyes widened. "Zeke, there are too many of them." "Maybe, but I've been running from fights my whole life." He checked his rifle again, muscle memory from a dozen campaigns guiding his hands. Time I stood and faced one. The first attacker came through the kitchen door, moving low and fast with a pistol drawn. Zeke's shot took him center mass, the man dropping like a sack of grain. But the gunfire gave away his position, and suddenly the parlor windows exploded inward as bullets chewed through glass and wood. Second floor. Elena vanished through the ceiling. "I'll try to confuse them from above." Zeke belly-crawled toward the staircase as more shots peppered the walls where he'd been standing. The smell of smoke grew stronger. Orange light flickered beyond the broken windows. They'd actually done it. Set fire to Elena's beautiful home like it meant nothing at all. Rage bubbled up from somewhere deep in his chest, hotter than the flames licking at the walls. This house wasn't just shelter anymore. It was where Elena had loved and lost, and waited 7 long years for someone who wouldn't abandon her. It was where he'd finally stopped running from his own ghosts. "Murphy!" Blackwood's voice came from the kitchen. "You killed one of my boys. That makes this personal." "Good," Zeke muttered, reaching the bottom of the stairs. "I was getting tired of business." He made it halfway up before the next wave hit. 2 men rushed the staircase from different angles, their boots pounding on the wooden steps like drumbeats. Zeke's rifle barked twice, dropping the first man, but only wounding the second, who dove for cover behind the banister. The wounded attackers returned fire, splintered wood inches from Zeke's head. Splinters drew blood from his cheek as he scrambled toward the landing, Elena's voice echoing from somewhere above. "Behind you." Zeke spun just as Blackwood himself appeared at the top of the stairs, shotgun leveled at Zeke's chest. The distance was too close to miss. Time seemed to slow as Blackwood's finger tightened on the trigger. His lips curved in a victor's smile. Then Elena stepped between them. She blazed like a star-going supernova, her ghostly form suddenly solid as winter ice and twice as cold. The temperature in the hallway plummeted so fast that Zeke's breath came out in white puffs. Frost formed on the windows despite the fires burning below. Blackwood's shotgun discharged, but the pellets passed harmlessly through Elena's glowing form and embedded themselves in the wall behind Zeke. The land speculator's face went white as milk. "What in the hell? This is my house," Elena said, her voice carrying the weight of 7 years' worth of protective fury. Miguel built these walls with love. I have defended them with everything I am. You are not welcome here." She raised one translucent hand, and every door in the house slammed shut at once. The remaining attackers' shouts turned to screams as unseen hands grabbed at their clothes, their weapons, their hair. One man came tumbling down the stairs, swearing he'd been pushed by invisible hands. But the effort was costing Elena dearly. Her brilliant glow began to fade, her solid form becoming transparent again. She swayed on her feet like a woman fighting off a fainting spell. "Elena, don't. I won't let them hurt you." She looked back at him over her shoulder, love and determination warring in her dark eyes. "Some things are worth dying for twice." The last words came out as barely a whisper. Then she collapsed. Her form scattered like morning mist, leaving only the faintest outline of where she'd been standing. Blackwood recovered his courage fast once the ghost disappeared. He swung his shotgun toward Zeke again, but his hands were shaking now, whether from cold or fear. "Parlor tricks," he snarled, though his voice cracked on the words. "Won't save you from lead poisoning." Zeke's rifle came up smooth as silk. At this range, he couldn't miss either. But before he could squeeze the trigger, Elena's voice echoed through the house one more time. "The deed, Zeke. Check Miguel's journal. Page 47. Then she was gone, leaving only the smell of lavender and the memory of her sacrifice. Blackwood fired, but his shaking hands sent the shot wide. Zeke's return shot took the land speculator in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending the shotgun clattering down the stairs. The remaining attackers broke and ran when they heard their boss screaming. Zeke could hear them crashing through the burning kitchen, shouting about devils and witches as they fled into the prairie night. But Blackwood wasn't finished. He clutched his wounded shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers, but his eyes still burned with greed and fury. "This isn't over, Murphy. I'll be back with more men. Bigger guns. You can't stay awake forever." "Maybe not," Zeke admitted, keeping his rifle trained on the wounded man. "But I don't have to fight you forever either." He backed toward the master bedroom, where Elena's journal lay on the nightstand. Page 47 revealed Miguel's careful handwriting, documenting the original land purchase, and something else, a marriage certificate dated 3 months before Miguel's death, legally making Elena Vasquez the property owner. "Funny thing about territorial law, Blackwood." Zeke couldn't keep the smile out of his voice. "A man's widow inherits his property rights, and a widow's chosen heir gets the same protection." Blackwood's face went from white to purple. "That's impossible. She's dead." "Dead doesn't mean gone, and it sure doesn't mean powerless." Zeke gestured toward the stairs with his rifle. "Now get out of Elena's house before she decides to finish what you started." As if summoned by her name, a cold wind swept through the burning house, extinguishing the flames like candles on a birthday cake. The acrid smell of smoke began to fade, replaced by the sweet scent of prairie grass and Elena's lavender soap. Blackwood stumbled down the stairs and out the front door, cradling his wounded arm and muttering curses that would have made a cavalry sergeant blush. But he was leaving, and that's what mattered. Zeke sank onto the bed, exhaustion hitting him like a physical blow. The house fell quiet, except for the soft creak of settling timbers and the distant sound of Blackwood's wagon disappearing into the night. "Elena?" His voice echoed in the empty rooms. "Elena? Are you there?" Only silence answered him, stretching on and on until he began to wonder if she'd used up everything she had to save his worthless hide. Dawn crept across the Nebraska prairie like a shy child, painting the eastern sky in shades of gold and rose that reminded Zeke of Elena's gentle smile. He sat on the front porch steps, Miguel's journal open in his lap, reading about the dreams of a young man who'd wanted to fill this house with children's laughter and his wife singing. The bullet holes in the walls had somehow sealed themselves during the night. The scorch marks from Blackwood's fires had faded to nothing. Even the broken windows had been replaced, their glass so clean it seemed invisible in the morning light. But Elena remained as absent as yesterday's rain. "Come on, darling," Zeke whispered to the empty air. "I know you're still here somewhere." You wouldn't leave me all alone in this big house, would you? A meadowlark's song drifted across the prairie, sweet and lonely as heartbreak itself. Zeke closed his eyes and tried to feel Elena's presence the way he had before that subtle shift in temperature. The sense of being watched by loving eyes. The comfort of knowing he wasn't truly alone in the world. Nothing. Just the vast silence of the plains and the growing certainty that he'd lost the best thing that had ever happened to him. I should have protected you better, he said to the morning sky. Should have found another way to fight them off without letting you spend yourself like that. The wind picked up, rustling through the prairie grass, with a sound like whispered secrets. Zeke opened Miguel's journal again, searching for some clue, some hint about how Elena had managed to anchor herself to this place for 7 years after death. Page 63 held the answer, written in Miguel's careful script. Elena says love is stronger than anything, stronger than distance, stronger than time, stronger than fear. I used to think she was just being romantic. Now I think maybe she was being practical. Love. Zeke repeated the word like a prayer. She stayed because she loved this place, loved the life you two were building here. He stood up, pacing to the porch railing and back again. But what about now? What's keeping her here, now? The answer hit him like lightning striking twice in the same spot. Elena hadn't stayed for the house, or even for Miguel's memory. She'd stayed for him, for the broken-down cowboy who'd stumbled into her life and given her something worth protecting again. Elena Vasquez, he called out, putting every ounce of feeling he possessed into her name. I know you can hear me. I know you're fighting to come back, same as I'm fighting to bring you back. A butterfly landed on the porch railing, its orange and black wings catching the morning light. Zeke had never paid much attention to butterflies before, but this one seemed different somehow. It perched there, watching him with what almost looked like intelligence. 7 years you waited for someone who wouldn't run away, he continued, talking to the butterfly because it was the only living thing around to listen. Well, here I am, still here, still not running. The butterfly's wings fluttered once, twice, then it took flight again, circling around Zeke's head before disappearing into the prairie grass. I love you, Elena. The words came out easier than he'd expected, natural as breathing or bleeding. I love your courage and your kindness, and the way you see something worth saving in a used-up old cowboy like me. I love how you protected this place, how you stood between me and Blackwood's guns without even thinking about the cost. The air around him began to shimmer like heat waves rising from summer pavement. But this was different, cooler, gentler, shot through with the scent of lavender and hope. I love how you make me want to be better than I am, Zeke went on, his voice gaining strength with each word. How you make me want to build something, instead of just drifting from one failure to the next. I love you enough to stay here and make this house a home again, the way Miguel dreamed it could be. Elena began to appear slowly, like a photograph developing in chemical baths. First, just an outline, translucent as morning mist, then more solid, more real, until she was sitting beside him on the porch steps with tears streaming down her face. I thought I was gone, she whispered, her voice rough with emotion. I used everything I had to save you from Blackwood. I could feel myself dissolving, spreading thinner and thinner until there was almost nothing left. What brought you back? You did. She took his hand, her fingers warm and solid and wonderfully real. Your voice calling my name, your refusal to give up on me. The love in your words, it gave me something to hold on to when I was drowning in the space between life and death. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher over the prairie. In the distance, a red-tailed hawk circled on rising thermals, its cry echoing across miles of grassland and possibility. What happens now? Elena asked. Blackwood will be back eventually, probably with a sheriff and legal papers claiming I can't own property because I'm dead. Let him come. Zeke squeezed her hand gently. I've been thinking about that marriage certificate. In Miguel's journal, territorial law says a widow can remarry and transfer property rights to her new husband. Elena's eyes widened, Ezekiel Murphy, are you asking me to marry you? I'm asking if you'd consider spending forever with a man who's got more past than future, and a tendency to make enemies of land speculators. Forever's a long time. Not long enough, Zeke said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. Elena laughed, the sound like water over stones in a clear stream. Yes, yes, I'll marry you, you impossible man. Though I should warn you, I come with certain unusual circumstances. Darling, after yesterday, I'm pretty sure I can handle unusual. They stood up together, Elena solid and warm in his arms, the house behind them glowing with morning light and new possibilities. Somewhere in the walls, Zeke could swear he heard the faint sound of wedding bells, as if the house itself was celebrating their decision. We'll need a preacher, Elena said practically, and witnesses, and I suppose I should figure out how to appear solid long enough for a ceremony. One step at a time, Zeke assured her. We've got all the time in the world now. A dust cloud appeared on the horizon, moving toward them at a steady pace. Zeke tensed, reaching for his rifle, but Elena placed a gentle hand on his arm. It's not Blackwood, she said with certainty. It's the circuit preacher. He comes through Devil's Ridge every month to perform weddings and baptisms. How do you know? Elena smiled mysteriously. A woman learns to recognize hope when it's riding toward her across the prairie. The dust cloud resolved into a wagon driven by an elderly man in a black coat, his white beard flowing in the wind like a banner of peace. Behind him rode two other wagons, settlers, by the look of them, heading west toward new lives and fresh starts. Perfect witnesses, Elena observed, though we might want to warn them about my unique situation. Let me handle that, Zeke said, already formulating a story that would satisfy curious minds without revealing Elena's true nature. I've gotten good at creative explanations lately. As the preacher's wagon drew closer, Zeke marveled at how quickly his life had changed. A week ago, he'd been a drifter with nothing but the clothes on his back and a reputation for bad luck. Now, he was about to marry the most extraordinary woman in the territory and settle down to build the kind of life he'd never dared dream about. No regrets? Elena asked softly, as if reading his thoughts. Only one, Zeke admitted. I wish I'd found you sooner. We found each other when we were ready, Elena replied wisely, when we both needed saving badly enough to take the risk. The preacher's wagon rolled to a stop in front of the house, and the old man climbed down with the careful movements of someone who'd spent too many years on hard wooden seats. His eyes were kind but sharp, taking in the bullet holes that hadn't quite finished healing themselves, and the scorch marks that were still fading from the porch. Morning, folks, he called out in a voice like aged whiskey. Name's Reverend Isaiah Crawford. I couldn't help but notice this fine house from the road. Mighty impressive piece of construction. Thank you, Reverend, Zeke replied, stepping forward to shake the man's hand. I'm Zeke Murphy, and this is Elena Vasquez. We were hoping you might have time to perform a wedding ceremony. The preacher's eyes twinkled with amusement. Well now, that's a fine coincidence. I do love a good wedding, and this seems like the perfect place for new beginnings. Behind them, Elena laughed with pure joy, the sound carrying across the prairie like a promise of better days ahead. And in that moment, Zeke knew with absolute certainty that he'd finally found where he belonged. Not just in this house or this territory, but in the space between one heartbeat and the next, in the breath between yesterday's sorrows and tomorrow's hopes. The last light of Devil's Ridge wasn't fading after all. It was just beginning to shine.